Canadian Centre for Energy Information, Global Public Affairs in Calgary, and the Canadian Embassy. I'd also like to thank BP America and BP Canada Energy Company, as well as BP Canada's representative here today, Anita, for their extraordinary support of this program. I'd like to welcome each of our panelists to the Woodrow Wilson Centre, as well as you, others who will be participating in the discussion, who have come to listen and discuss S&T and R&D issues surrounding challenges in all aspects of the energy industry and the Canada-U.S. context. In a few moments, I'll turn the floor over to Colleen Killingsworth, President of the Canadian Centre for Energy Information, and to Michael Raymont, CEO of EnergylNet, who will chair this morning's program. For those of you unfamiliar with the Centre, the Woodrow Wilson International Centre for Scholars is the living national memorial to the 28th President, established by the United States Congress in 1968 within the Smithsonian Institution. It is a nonpartisan institution supported by public and private funds engaged in the study of national and world affairs. The Center establishes and maintains a neutral forum for free, open, and informed dialogue. It does not have a research or legislative agenda. As a distinguished scholar, the only American president with a PhD, Wilson felt strongly that the scholar and the policymaker were engaged in a common enterprise. The Wilson Center's Canada Institute looks at key issues in the United States-Canada relationship. Our aim is to advance the dialogue between our countries by increasing public understanding, encouraging discussion across different sectors, and working towards pragmatic solutions. This is the 7th in our series of Woodrow Wilson Center cross-border forums and energy issues. We've been exceedingly pleased with the positive interest and response that we've gotten to these forums. It's a pleasure to work with the Canadian Centre for Energy Information and with Global Public Affairs. I'm happy to say the energy forums have become a regular part of the dialogue here at the Centre. This is the 7th, and past forums have discussed the cross-border energy environment and business, energy infrastructure, natural gas supply, oil sands, the electricity system, and last fall, the assurance and security of the system. As you know, energy has an important impact on our citizens in so many ways. It empowers our economies and our daily lives. It enables our productivity and our lifestyle. Yet, as we in North America seek energy security and economic growth, we've become very aware of the environmental cost of such security and growth and of the overall importance of environmental sustainability. The dynamic and prosperous energy relationship between Canada and the United States includes the transfer of many different kinds of products between the two countries. Within this extensive relationship, though, there are inevitable policy, regulatory, and environmental challenges, as well as lessons and opportunities to share. To address those challenges, we need a candid dialogue across the U.S.-Canadian public and private sectors. We need to assess the current state of North American investment and the research in new technologies, the potential for future development and cooperation, and the obstacles challenge that will no doubt appear on the horizon. The U.S.-Canada relationship works best when Americans and Canadians communicate regularly and act together on behalf of our many shared interests. Forums like this provide an opportunity for the kind of partnership, dialogue, and practical cooperation that has enabled our people to forge what is the most successful bilateral relationship ever enjoyed by neighboring states. Today's forum is designed to encourage frank and open dialogue. While the first part of the program is being webcast, the second part will have no media, no cameras, and no record of who says what. It's important that people speak up and not hold back. We will produce a report of the themes discussed, but no opinions will be attributed to anyone. I would also like to ask you, and I'm going to do this right now, to turn off your cell phones because it really messes up the webcast. BlackBerries, everything else. If you're panicking after the first session, when the webcast gets turned off, you can turn it back on, but it really does mess up. And since we're archiving this for the future and people are watching this elsewhere, we don't want to confuse things. And if you feel, if the speakers and panelists, if you can't speak sitting down, you've got to walk around. We have handheld mics for you to speak with, and we need those for the webcast and so people can hear. Another housekeeping thing is because we're being webcast, the focus of the camera does best when there's only 4 people up front. So after the first 4 people have spoken, we'll do a little shift and get the other 4 towards the middle. And there's one change to the program today. Prime Minister Harper has asked Gary Lunn, Minister of Natural Resources, to be in Edmonton today, so he will not be our speaker at lunch at the Canadian Embassy. John Nubley, Associate Deputy Minister of Natural Resources Canada, will speak in his place. And now, it is my pleasure to turn the rest over to people who know much more about this than I do, Colleen Killingsworth.
Thanks, David. I just want to take 2 minutes to bring my greetings and welcome as well this morning. I'm Colleen Killingsworth, President of the Canadian Centre for Energy Information. It's great to see so many new faces and so many familiar faces here this morning. So for those of you that aren't familiar with the Canadian Centre for Energy Information, we're a nonprofit third-party energy information resource. Some people call us really the resource library on Canadian energy. And we are as I said, nonprofit, non-advocacy, public-private partnership. We do run a web portal that does provide a broad range of information on Canadian energy, as well as within our print publications. Part of our mandate as well is to help facilitate informed dialogue and discussion on Canadian energy. So we're really pleased to have this partnership with the Canada Institute here at the Woodrow Wilson Centre and bring these forums together. I'd like to thank our partners, David Biet and his team here at the Canada Institute, Lorraine Royer and her team at Global Public Affairs, and Paul Connors and his team at the Canadian Embassy. Without this partnership, we wouldn't be able to pull these forums together. And I would also like to acknowledge Anita Perry and her colleague from BP, BP Canada and BP America, our sponsor today. Again, we can't do these forums without the support of our sponsors, so we really do appreciate your interest and support. David took care of the housekeeping announcements, so that's great. And now I'll just introduce our MC and let him take away the morning. Dr. Michael Raymont became EnergylNet's first permanent CEO in October of 2005. Michael has extensive government and business experience and is responsible for leading EnergylNet's stakeholder engagement, network development, program integration, and business sustainability activities. Prior to joining EnergylNet, he was acting president and vice president, technology and industry support with the National Research Council of Canada, where he provided leadership to NRC's major national industrial research programs, including the Industrial Research Assistance Program. Michael has also led several technology companies, raised public and private equity, developed business and marketing strategies, recruited management teams, and established strategic relationships with several multinational Fortune 1000 companies. Michael, it's my pleasure to turn the forum over to you.
Well, thank you, Colleen, and good morning, everybody. It's a great pleasure and an honor to be here and have a chance to chair this session. I think it's a very exciting topic, one that is dear and near, I'm sure, to all of our hearts. We have 8 speakers in the first part of this session whose presentations are really there to stimulate your thinking, hopefully to be somewhat provocative. I know my few words will be, hopefully a little provocative. And then, as Colleen and Dave indicated earlier, we'll then move to a closed-door session, which is really a dialogue. It is not a question and answer. I really want it to take the form of a dialogue. And in fact, actually, as I was looking at the short title of my presentation, as I saw it on my own disk this morning, or on my own memory stick, it was titled WWF, and it made me think, well, that's great. Maybe we can have a real dialogue around here this morning. So I'm not going to give you any kind of a background on EnergylNet, except to say that we're a not-for-profit group supported by the federal governments, many provincial governments in Canada, and many energy companies, not just oil and gas, but a total range of energy companies. And our job is to look integratively in a neutral way at technology and technology implications over the whole range of energy issues, and try to look for technology solutions that are truly energy integrative. And I think, and I hope that's a theme which will come out today. So with that said, I'm going to make a few comments that I hope will at least stimulate some thought here today. So this was the title that I was given to talk to, and I've added a question mark at the end of it, because the reason for that is, quite simply, in my view, energy innovation is essential but insufficient to get really to the stage of solving problems, solving the challenges that we have in the energy industry in this world. So indeed, we must coordinate the outputs and inputs of technology innovation with many other aspects of the energy business in order to implement full solutions. And I've listed a whole bunch of different things down there. I don't propose to go through them, but there are obvious things such as regulatory issues, infrastructure. And let me just give an example there. We've got a huge existing distribution network. Technology is fine. We hear about the development of many renewable technologies, but how much thought has been given to how we integrate the outputs of those renewable energy technologies into existing distribution systems and existing grids? And I think we're also already seeing in certain parts of North America and the rest of the world in the wind energy area that this is becoming a huge problem. So we must think about innovation and energy technologies much more broadly than just, oh, this is neat research and development, this is neat engineering. And we must put it into the really broad context. I think it must be pragmatically focused. It has to be commercially focused. And in that respect, and again, just a couple of little comments, personal comments, but for example, grain ethanol, with all due respect, makes no sense to me at all. We need food in this world. And if we don't need food for humans, we need food for cattle. If we don't need food for cattle, then fine, let's go and make ethanol from it. But there are other better sources of ethanol, and that would include wood wastes, and those are the kinds of technologies then of working on cellulosic waste, the stover, the straw, the wood waste, and so on, where we can derive ethanol. And just as a point, to make my point really clear, Brazil, which was one of the leaders in foodstuff ethanol, is now a net importer of foodstuffs to keep their population alive. So let's be sensible in the way we go about energy technologies. Let's think about how we do them in a common sense way. So the next kind of question I'd like to pose to you and be thinking about is, do we have innovative technologies today to deal with the energy challenges we face? If not, what are they? But we need to start off by defining those challenges and the solutions we need, rather than shotgunning a whole bunch of different exciting, nevertheless, I'm sure, energy research and development projects. We need to identify the challenges, the practical commercial challenges, and identify the solutions that we need to do for those, and set our science and innovation minds to work to come up with those solutions. And how do we move to an implementation agenda? And how do we drastically accelerate implementation? And I'll mention a couple of comments about why that's necessary. A couple of other questions that I've stimulated there, I think. How do we coordinate global action? We've seen some stops and starts and stutters in that, but many of the problems we face, whether they are supply and demand or whether they are climate change, are indeed global concerns, and how do we deal with them in a global way? And another question which, given one of our sponsors today, and by the way, thank you to all of the sponsors, but I think public education and public information is an incredibly important part of what we're doing. So we in this room may well feel that we can reach answers today that address many of the questions and many of the challenges we face. But in fact, there are not only politicians out there, but the public at large out there who are largely uninformed about some of the truths around energy, and there are many, many myths that exist there. And I'll give you just one. I was asked the other day by a House of Commons committee in Canada why we couldn't replace 1 million barrels of oil by wind farms. And if anybody wants the short answer to that, I'd be happy to give it later, but it's basically 85 gigawatts of electricity. Since wind farms only operate part-time, about 30% of the time, you're probably looking at about 240 gigawatts of installed capacity. That's about 3 times the total world's installed capacity of wind energy, and would take about 15 years of the total supply of every wind turbine manufacturer in the world just for that oil sands replacement project. You know, it's the scale and the magnitude on which we use energy that I think the public does not understand, and it is perhaps the seriousness of some of the challenges we face that we don't communicate. It is our fault. We are the ones who must take on the responsibility of communicating to the public so they understand the kinds of issues we're facing. Very quickly, energy consumption and economic prosperity are very, very closely linked. So, yes, through energy efficiency and conservation, we can make some attempts to reduce our energy consumption per head, per unit of population, but GDP per head will still only increase. And ask some of the countries down in the bottom left-hand corner, like the Brazils and the Cameroons and the Indias and the Zimbabwe's and Nigerias of this world, and I'm sure they'll tell you they want more energy. And energy demand is bound to rise, and neither energy efficiency or conservation alone, nor the deployment of renewables at the pace at which we can deploy them, will address this challenge. We will have to rely on fossil fuels for the next 150 or 250 years. So there is some good news, to this, and that is if you look at the second bullet here, energy production and consumption per se do not contribute meaningfully to climate change, in spite of the IPCC report, and I am in fact not at heads with the IPCC report in this. It is, as Angus Bruno, known to many of you in this room, would say, it is the byproducts. Actually, to quote his exact language, he says, it ain't the energy, it's the byproducts of energy that are a problem. And to just give that a little more context, if in fact we translated every joule of energy that we produce on this planet into heat, and the second law of thermodynamics kind of implies that we probably will end up there eventually anyway, we would raise the temperature of this planet maybe a tenth, maybe 2/10 of a degree. It is the byproducts of energy production, the CO2, methane being, of course, far worse greenhouse gas than CO2, but it is the byproducts, certain all sorts of things, of energy production and use that cause climate change. And I can today say, and this is where I do go back to the IPCC report, the most recent one, that do cause climate change. I didn't say global warming, I said climate change. And so, but the good news is, though, that if we mitigate those byproducts, there is no reason why this world cannot continue to use increasing quantities of energy without chewing itself to pieces. And so, indeed, energy is really important. If you look at my fourth bullet there, energy, in fact, solves many of the global problems, social and otherwise, and environmental challenges that we face today, including such things as without energy, how do we do desalination? How do we, in fact, solve the problem of greenhouse gases? CO2 sequestration requires energy. Food production requires energy, food production and processing. And so we need energy. And so my conclusion is from this, then, that we should actively accelerate energy production technologies, but those which mitigate byproducts of production and use. And this covers both fossil fuels, of course, and alternates and renewables as fast as we can bring them on. Now, this is not to say we should not also bring in, as rapidly as possible, appropriate efficiency and conservation measures to try to, again, reduce the impacts of the wrong energy byproducts. Good news also, we have enough energy. There is no energy shortage in this world, and again, I won't get into details in this particular slide, but the little button at the top is what we actually consume today. The other ones are the sources of energy that the world has, and there are many technologies to harness those sources of energy. So, I think we all know that energy, environment, and the economy are now inexorably linked, and we must find ways of moving toward what we would call an integrated energy economy, where it is linked indeed with those other things. The third bullet, there's no magic bullet. There's no perfect solution, and we'll need every energy source we can possibly muster. But I think we must face, in the technology field, that carbon and fossil fuel sources will still supply most of the world's energy for the foreseeable future. I put in a number there of 20% by 2050 for renewables. I'm told now that's probably very optimistic, and we're unlikely to get there. And thus, and there's one message that I really want to get to you today, it is that technology and innovation to triage the impacts of fossil fuels and managing the transition to new energy paradigms are the most critical energy issues facing the planet today and for the next 100 years or so. We cannot, the scale on which we use energy is such that we cannot possibly move to renewables fast enough in the next 100, 150, maybe 250 years to not do something about fossil fuels and their impacts on the environment and so on. And we must use then an integrated approach, an energy systems approach to do this. I'm going to skip through that slide, but simply mention that one of the challenges then we face in technology innovation is unleashing really a supply chain of innovation. And what do I mean by a supply chain of innovation? Well, a supply chain of innovation looks a little like this, with an idea in the bottom left-hand corner and a product in the top right-hand corner. And often what happens is we do a lot of work in the left-hand portion of the region, primarily led by government and government funding in basic and applied R&D. And the private sector picks up on the right-hand edge here, where we're into marketable and fully commercial technologies. And of course, what often happens is that we have, and I've called it the technology innovation gap. I'm not sure that I really like the valley of death. I just think that term sort of presupposes that all our technologies are going to fail crossing it. There are many technologies that can, but this is one of the most difficult areas to work in, and it is the most challenging area for technology innovation. Is not so much, in fact, there was the recent Princeton report, I'm sure many of you have seen, which simply said, we have all the technologies today to produce clean energy in this world. What we don't have is the implementation and commercialization processes to put it in place. So, indeed, energy innovation, as I said at the beginning, is insufficient, and we need to interact with all these other areas around it if we are going to successfully implement energy innovation. And perhaps I'll finish with this slide here to stimulate some thinking, which is part of the reason why it is so difficult to get energy innovations to cross that technology gap, or whatever we would like to call it. And my supposition here is quite simply that when you move from an idea to a product, the same thing as the innovation supply chain, I'll try and explain all the curves on this. Public sector funding, very strong at the beginning and tends to die away as we get toward commercial product. Private sector funding, very weak at the basic research level, but climbs strongly as you get toward a commercial product. And there's a reason for that. The reason is quite simply that increasing political risk makes it difficult for governments to put large sums of money and to pick winners, possibly, in projects as they near the commercial end of things. Because we're talking now in this middle area where you might be putting hundreds of millions of dollars into a single technology. The private sector, on the other hand, looks at this and says, but there's increasing financial risk as I go to earlier stage projects, so my money is only going to go in at this stage. And although this is qualitative, if in fact you sum the money going in across various stages of the innovation supply chain, what you will find is the lowest point comes at the most difficult time, and that is that crossing the chasm, the valley of death, the technology gap, or indeed that commercialization phase and implementation phase that we have. So with that said, I hope those comments have helped stimulate some thinking. I have not specifically talked about any types of energy technology, purposely, because I'm sure our speakers will address some of those. But I hope that some of those comments about the difficulties and challenges we face, and yet the necessities we have of making certain we get innovation, energy innovation, commercialized and implemented, you will pick up in the sessions we have later. So without any more ado, I'd like to introduce, and by the way, I am not going to give you any biographies on any of the speakers in the interest of time. I'm going to ask the speakers to try, please, to keep to actually 8 minutes rather than 10, because we have 8 of you to speak. And if you do take more time, the consequences will be these guys won't get coffee and donuts at 10:30, so it'll be your fault. So with that said, I'm going to introduce Graham Campbell, the Director General of the Office of Research and Development at Natural Resources Canada. Graham.
Can I stand here, Mike?
Yeah, by all means. And want.
Escape me?
Yeah. It's all right. I'll grab that.
That's me. Can I do it here? Okay, with that one there.
No.
Left and right. Okay, good. Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here at the Woodrow Wilson Forum. It's an honor, in fact, representing my department back in Canada, Natural Resources Canada. You can think of us as a conglomerate department. We have forestry, earth sciences, minerals and metals, and energy is all part of our mandate. And I'm here representing the energy part of the enterprise. It's very interesting to us as technology folk to see that the Woodrow Wilson Forum has science, innovation, and technology on the agenda. I think it tells a couple of things very eloquently. One is there's a solution in the making here, and I hope to give you a bit of a sketch as to how I see things unfolding in the near future, but also that there's a way to do not only the fixes, but also the economic growth, the improvement to the environment, jobs, commercial opportunities as well. So don't just think of this simply as a techie agenda. It really is quite profound in its impacts relative to our economies as a whole. This panel, as it says here, is the panel on government approaches and perspectives. Mike has given us an excellent start, and it's hard to follow Mike, actually, when he speaks, so we'll do our best. But today I wanted to leave you with 4 messages. And if you go away with anything from this talk, you scribble these down, I will have done my job. First of all, my thesis and postulate this morning is that we've moved beyond the idea of energy paradox, energy a cause of the problem, what do we do about it, to a sense of having an environmental and energy synergy. It's not only important for the technologies themselves, but it's the way we look at energy and the diverse sources we draw on. So here's some more about the environmental technology synergy. Secondly, we have promising solutions, as Mike has said. Some are on the shelf and ready to go, and we ought to provoke ourselves to use them as quickly as possible, and there's others in the making, and I'll be talking about a few of those today. Third, given the context of this session, technology has a role to play, and government is acting. Not only US DOE, which shows probably the best national leadership worldwide in energy technology, but also our own government at home in Canada is making some announcements lately. And my last point, very much in sync with what Mike has said, is that it really is time to act now. We've done the priority setting, we've done the planning, we know what needs to be done. The message here is let's get on with it. Just to set the stage a bit, this is for people not necessarily from Canada. This is basically a snapshot of our energy history. The vertical graph is percent of commodity used as primary energy. And if you can see it from where you're sitting, I've listed here biomass, wood basically, chop the tree down, dry it, and burn it. Back in the early days, quite different configurations now. Coal, which enjoyed its day around 1900, had its peak. And then quite an interesting mix as things have unfolded. Petroleum, of course, first discovery of major petroleum resources in 1947. And the rest is history, if you like, on the petroleum side, but also now natural gas, hydro, nuclear, etc., as you see fit here. So a bit of history on how we've evolved over the past 140 years since our country began in 1867. Some of the issues or some of the features that you see on the diagram. First of all, transitions are us. And your diagram doesn't look that much different, really, to ours in Canada. But we've had many energy commodities come, many energy commodities go, some greener than others, some more profound technically, but certainly an evolving history is the message you should be getting from this chart. Secondly, it's not just a technology thing, it's not just a resource endowment thing, but government has exerted its hand at a number of points on this curve. The petroleum curve, for example, the extremely rapid rise post-war was due to the installation of infrastructure. National pipelines to move oil from where it is to where it's needed. Likewise with natural gas. We had an intense debate politically in Canada, 1956, 50 years ago plus or minus, as to how pipelines would be financed in this country. The product of that was a continental spanning pipeline that brings natural gas from Western Canada to the economic heartland in Ontario. Huge history there. And likewise with hydrogen, or with hydro and also with nuclear. Each of these has a signature on it that is the direct consequence of industry leading, opening up a new resource, building new infrastructure, government doing its part to help make it happen. A few features that the diagram shows us, and look over on the right-hand side as I speak. First of all, more diverse than ever. We've never had a more plural mix of energy commodities that are functioning now in the country. That diversity brings security with it. We're not reliant anymore on 50% plus from any one commodity. We've got quite an interesting mix here. Thirdly, greener overall. Certainly not from our early days where it was wood dominated, but if you look across that diagram, by nature, we're greener now than we were before. And lastly, nothing has really gone away. We're still using wood to a certain degree. We're still using biomass in some cases in quite an advanced style. So a broader mix in the future is also what we're expecting to see unfold. Let me come to the paradox. Energy is obviously a key factor in economic growth, energy security, improved quality of life. essentially the heartbeat of a country running through it as a consequence of energy. But the paradox is caused by the fact that it's also a contributor to the issues that we're facing: environment, footprint, impact on fresh water, etc. So my thesis here for you this morning, and it's certainly something I'd like to come back to as to whether I'm dreaming in Technicolor or not, is that we're moving a bit beyond this idea of having a problem on our hands, the energy paradox, and we're moving towards a closer energy-environment synergy. 4 ways to take action, and we're all involved in these. The people in this room, the leadership that you have a responsibility to make these things happen. And I cite 4 ways here. The latter 3, of course, are technology intensive. First way is probably the easiest, maybe not obvious. Don't use it if you don't have to. And use energy less, conserve, sweaters, thermostats, you know the story. Use energy wisely. This is our energy efficiency agenda. Mike mentioned this in his opening remarks. It's probably the quickest, the most immediate, and the most profound in terms of how energy can be used better. Finding cleaner ways to supply, converse, and use. This is the impact of renewables. It's the impact of nuclear on energy systems. And then the 4th way, clean up the impact of fossil fuels. I was careful here. Not eliminate fossil fuels, clean up the impact of fossil fuels. And certainly Mike's comments reinforce that. Technologies, certainly many coming through the pipeline. The first that I wanted to mention, though, is that there's a suite of technologies that are out there today, known to many of us, that are on the shelf and ready to go. And surely our first imperative to try to get this energy-environment synergy is to make use of those. Let's get them out there and get them going. But the categories coming through the system, this is essentially the area that I work in most actively, I've divided up into 3 broad categories. The first are emerging technologies. These are well familiar to you: CO2 capture and storage, cellulosic ethanol. The recipe for these is demonstration, getting them out there, supporting codes and standards, for example, to pave the road for the technology then with the marketplace. Second is next generation. These are technologies which are just almost there, more in the R&D phase though. Gasification and oxy-fuel of clean coal, and there's projects in both countries that are going to show leadership there. Electricity storage. Think of the electricity grid as essentially a flow grid. I think what we need to think about going forward is putting some storage into that grid, essentially making it more reliable, more secure, maintaining quality power, etc. Hydrogen and fuel cells and transportation, solar PV. Many of the issues here are not will it work, but how much does it cost and what infrastructure do we need to make it happen? So more of an R&D agenda, more networks, more pre-competitive by its very nature at this stage. Lastly, just over the horizon. These are zero-emission coals, doing a lot of work on that now, but not quite there yet. Next generation nuclear, this is post our light water systems, a couple of stages ahead of us. Gas hydrates and fusion power, the favorite long-term panacea for energy technologies. The diagram, by the way, in the lower diagram, the lower picture I should say, is a gas hydrate burning. Think of it as solid natural gas storage, touch a spark to it or a flame, it just burns away, as you can see there, with a huge resource storage impact. So what have we learned from our experts? We don't pretend to do it all ourselves, certainly. Our experts are saying some rather clear, distinct, and simple messages. First of all, if you're thinking about a particular energy technology and you forget the system or you don't pay attention to the system in which it fits, you're missing a huge system opportunity. Secondly, don't try to do it all, be selective. And we're hoping to head off in that direction. It's a balance thing. It's not just supply, it's also end use. And don't forget the carrier conversion, either to fuels or to electricity. And lastly, most of the parties that we talk to, and there's 4 or 5 that I've looked at recently, think that there's a fair convergence on the technologies that we need. It's not as if everybody's slate of technologies is different. Rather, if you line them up side by side on the page, many similarities. The diagram there, hard to see, is a report that we commissioned by an expert panel, the National Advisory Panel on Sustainable Energy Science and Technology. By good fortune, we have a member of the panel with us this morning, Patrice Marin-Best, at the back table. And this report has been most influential at the heart of our department, at the heart of government, in giving us a steer, not only in terms of which priorities, but also in terms of how to do them. So Patrice, we thank you and your colleagues for your good work. Collaboration is very important, and in part that's why we're all here this morning, I suppose. Not only at home, and we have a very strong federal provincial technology network, but also that critical link to try to get the community together, industry, government, and provinces working away on technology. We've done a full suite of roadmaps, 10 of them of late, all on energy technologies. and have been a product of this networking that's taken place. International collaboration, U.S.-Canada, our closest economic relationship, it goes without saying, and it's very important for us in a technological sense to try to work together as close as possible. It's wonderful to have David, my close colleague in U.S. DOE, with us this morning. Second bullet is U.S., Mexico, and Canada. David's just come back, so I imagine he's going to say a word or two about that. But this is a trilateral. We now span the continent, and again, we have a technology working group beavering away. It's just selected 5 top priorities for its work, and it's also added a 6th, which is electricity transmission and distribution, extremely important in the North American energy economy. Likewise, with international organizations, I won't go through them here. You can see their logos. Probably the most novel and the newest opportunity we've seized is through technology-specific partnerships. The IEA covers the whole waterfront, but the technology-specific ones in carbon sequestration, nuclear, etc., have been very useful to build this international engagement. What's our government done lately? Well, here's an example of a series of announcements made in the beginning of January, January 17th actually, that launch us in a direction of eco-energy. So this idea of environment-energy synergy is really rolling out very explicitly as the new Canadian government moves ahead. Just let me quote, this is our minister talking in a press release when the technology announcement was made. Our real challenge is to be a clean energy superpower. To do this, we must address the fact that the greatest source of untapped energy is the energy we waste, energy efficiency. We must also increase our renewable energy and develop S&T to make conventional energy cleaner. More renewables, greener systems, sustainable fossil fuels, all in one tight quote. Part of this was not only not energy technology, but also an energy efficiency announcement and one also on renewables. This one in particular, the technology one, $230 million over the next 4 years. I know in terms of U.S. scale, it's not a large amount of money, especially when you flip the currency back, but for us in Canada, it's something we're extremely pleased with, and it helps us move ahead over the next period of time. We've done our priority setting, and I've grouped them up into 3 groups here. The orange are essentially reducing the impact of fossil fuels, some classics there, CO2 capture and storage, clean coal, and clean oil sands production. In the green category is increasing the green energy content of our system, bioenergy, renewable energy in buildings, electricity, etc., next generation nuclear. And lastly, in blue, the end-use sectors, transportation, industry, and buildings. This program is in the making now as we speak, and we'll be rolling it out in further detail in April. The key factor here, though, is we're putting very strong emphasis not on essentially internal government work, but rather on engaging with the provinces, engaging with industry to make these roll out. Main messages. Have we moved? My thesis is we have, from energy paradox towards energy environmental synergies. The energy mix is evolving. It's moving in the right direction. Were we to do nothing, this would probably continue. Can government help? What are the right things we need to do to provoke it to move faster and in the right direction? 4 ways that I'm suggesting. Conserve first and foremost, improve energy efficiency, develop cleaner sources, clean up the impacts of fossil fuels, recognizing that they'll be valuable and useful to us for the long term. Many technology solutions in the making, and I've listed them all here for you again. The last remark is important. It's not an instantaneous thing. Technology takes some time. And as you can see in my 3 categories, the emerging, the next generation, and over the horizon, we're probably talking a time span of 40 or 50 years to get those over the horizon ones to come up close. What are the experts saying? They're getting us out of the micro into the macro. Think energy systems, be selective, address both supply and end use. Collaboration works, not only at home, but also abroad. Our new government is moving ahead with initiatives, and the Eco Energy Package is one such initiative, including technology. If there's one point to leave you with, in addition to the ones I left you with at the beginning, I'll just come back to number 4. It's time to act now. And lastly, technology and innovation, in the context of this seminar in particular, offer one promising pathway to progress. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Graham. That was a really useful overview of what's happening in Canada, and I think some great insights into some positive directions we can move in. Our next speaker is David Pumphrey. David is Deputy Assistant Secretary at US DOE, And again, without any further aplomb, I'd like to ask David to address his remarks.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. Before we started on the effort to come up with presentations for this, Graham and I consulted some because it would be very difficult for us to really do two distinct presentations on the views we have on technology development and the role of government in promoting that. So I've let Graham do the formal lecture part of it, and I'll speak a little bit more informally. Also reflects the fact that I did just get in last night from Mexico, and being that it was snowy, it was about 3 hours later than it was supposed to be. But first, I think this is probably clear to everyone, but technology innovation, technology development is of critical importance to this administration. I think we've made very clear that developing technologies is really the ultimate solution to the critical problems we face in terms of energy security and the challenges of the global environment. The President has made this an important piece of the last two State of the Union messages. The most recent one was launching the 20 in 10 initiative I'll speak of in a little bit more. Last year's State of the Union announced the Advanced Energy Initiative, which was a broad set of initiatives and additional funding for research and development. And then, of course, the Energy Policy Act contained a number of items to spur technology development and deployment. So I don't think there should be any mistake that we believe that innovation and technology development and the deployment of that technology development is really at the core of how we approach our energy problems. I think the topic here today, which is looking at the pathway to progress in a North American market, really reflects the interconnected nature of this market. And Graham had mentioned that we just had this meeting of our North American Energy Working Group in Mexico City, and technology development, energy efficiency, and deployment of technologies really dominated that discussion in Mexico. The effort that Graham had discussed, which was identifying 5 or 6, Graham, I don't know if I haven't given him a readout yet on whether or not the 6th one was adopted by the leaders. We'll discuss that later. But was an effort to identify gaps in technology innovation and development in 5 particular areas. The area, not surprising, I think, given the focus now that emerged as the most common area of interest, was biofuels development. And what can we do to move biofuels into a more important role in our energy mix? As I mentioned in the State of the Union message, the President announced his 20 in 10 plan, which is basically a plan to reduce gasoline consumption by 20% in the next 10 years. Under this plan, the President would like to see a displacement of 35 billion gallons of gasoline by 2017 through a combination of alternative fuels, principally biofuels, but not only biofuels, and fuel efficiency improvements. As an important part of this initiative, our goal is to make cellulosic ethanol cost competitive with corn-based ethanol by 2012. And this is really critical to understand. And it was a topic of discussion in Mexico City yesterday. We really can't depend on corn-based ethanol to reach these kinds of goals. We really have to move this technology into the marketplace to take our agricultural waste products and find a way to move them forward. And it was clearly a topic that resonated with all 3 countries. On our side, to do this, we requested a 19% increase in the research and development budget for our biomass program for fiscal year 2008. So the request is $179 million for that year, which is a really, if you look over the past few years, this budget has increased tremendously. But we're not limiting to biofuels in terms of the areas of focus. One of the very important projects that the administration is moving forward on is our near-zero emissions fossil fuel plant called FutureGen. This is part of the President's Coal Research Initiative, which provides for $2 billion in R&D funding over the next 10 years. And to reach that $2 billion mark, the coal R&D budgets have been increasing dramatically over the last 2 years. And for FY08, we've been requested $426 million, which is an increase of nearly 30% over last year's request. The FutureGen project is really an effort to demonstrate that carbon sequestration will work and that it can be safe. And this is the key to dealing with our CO2 emissions, is bringing this technology into reality. We will be using coal, the world will be using coal for the future. We have to use coal, but we need to find a way that we can deal with the CO2 emissions that come from the continued use of coal. Other technologies of focus include the continuing role and focus on hydrogen and the development of hydrogen and commercializing hydrogen within the next 20 years. A focus, an increasing focus on nuclear power and how do we move the new technologies that will be safer and more proliferation resistant into the marketplace. And of course, energy efficiency in buildings and vehicles. Plug-in hybrids, for example, as a efficient energy transportation mechanism, more efficient light bulbs, dealing with the use of energy in buildings. And these areas have seen requests for increases in the budget ranging from 8 to 63% for 2008. As Graham pointed out, we though recognize very clearly that we can't do this only through the U.S. Research activities. This is really a global effort, and we need to increase our cooperation not only in North America but within the rest of the world. And Graham had put on his board there the listing of some of those groupings that have become truly an increasing focus of how to exchange the information, link the researchers, build the networks of technology so that we can leverage the work that we're doing. I'll walk through a few of them. The International Partnership for Hydrogen Economy is really trying to accelerate the development of both codes and standards and exchange information on research activities. Carbon Sequestration Leadership Forum is a grouping of countries interested in all the issues, both codes and standards, but the question of how can you be certain that the CO2 you put in the ground stays there? What are the issues that need to be dealt with? The Generation 4 activities for the development of fourth generation nuclear technologies. And in over-the-horizon terms, I guess you would call it, is the ITER process for developing fusion technologies. I only use ITER because I can never quite say the full name of the set of technologies there. But how do we bring that into fruition? So that it's both nearer term activities as well as the longer term. One area I would highlight, and Graham perhaps in some modesty didn't highlight the work that's going on through the International Energy Agency. Graham has been chairman of one of the 5 standing committees. It's a Committee on Energy Research and Technology that I believe is a truly central part of the collaboration amongst the IEA members as well as non-member countries to develop new technologies. Within the framework of the IEA, the 26 member countries and the non-members are working in almost all the areas that Graham had mentioned as critical to our future: hydrogen, carbon sequestration, energy efficiency, fusion, biofuels, oil and gas technologies, and many other areas. In support of these multilateral endeavors, the Department's been investing about $70 million annually to support these networks and the development of these networks. However, almost all of the research and development we do contributes to realizing the goals of these multilateral activities. In North America, the North America Energy Working Group has become a central piece, as well as our bilateral and long-standing relationship with Canada. One of the areas of cooperation with Canada I would like to highlight that has been very important to Graham has been a project looking at demonstrating carbon sequestration's commercial possibilities. This is the Weyburn Carbon Sequestration Project, which is taking CO2 out of a coal-to-gas plant in the U.S. and injecting it into old oil reservoirs in Canada to improve the recovery of oil. And I believe this has been a truly very important project in developing and showing that we can do carbon sequestration, and it doesn't have to only be a cost in those terms. Canada, obviously, and I can't really leave a group like this without saying how important Canada is and how reliable Canada has been as a supplier of imported oil and gas for this country. We see the work that's going on in the development of the oil sands in Alberta as really critical to the future of energy security in North America. And we believe that technology development to develop those resources in a more environmentally and cost-effective way are really critical for our future. Returning a little bit to the North American Energy Working Group, we're trying to build this as a vehicle for greater industrial participation, too, in the government activities. We've been having several workshops in the NAWIG process to focus on both gas trade issues, cross-border electricity, but also beginning to look at what are the issues confronting us in the deployment of new technologies. And I think that's the direction that we'll be taking for our future activities, is how do we work together to develop technologies, how do we move those technologies into the marketplace. We have a very well-functioning market at this point, and government's role right now in terms of the trade is really to find a way not to make things worse in that regard. So I think we've decided that we need to move forward and look at how do we move technologies into the marketplace. Finally, we are looking at developing a new instrument that will provide a framework for the researchers in all three countries to come together. Again, Canada, I think, has taken an important role in developing this agreement that will allow our researchers to come together and join their efforts. So I think with that, I'll probably leave there and be glad to answer any questions that you have, but want to thank the Woodrow Wilson Center and all the other sponsors for putting this together. Thank you.
David, thank you very much. And if you don't mind, we'll hold questions until after the coffee break, because it's already in danger as we go now. So we will try and go through these. Please keep notes, scribble questions, and you'll have ample time afterwards to ask those. So again, moving straight on, I'd like to now introduce Alison Scott. Alison is Deputy Minister of the Department of Energy of the Government of Nova Scotia. Alison, welcome, and you're up.
Thanks, Michael. In an effort to try to get us back on track, I'm going to abbreviate some of my early remarks, which is probably going to drive Ross over here crazy, but we'll see what we can do. It's great to be back in Washington, and thank you for inviting me here. It's as Graham said, quite an honor to be asked to make a presentation here. By way of background, what I'm going to do is tell you a little bit about our province. I realize we're not Alberta. We're not the first place you think of when you think of cross-border energy issues between Canada and the United States. But we're going to tell you a little bit about where we are and what our resources are in terms of energy, the problems that we're working on, and then we're going to focus on one technology in particular that we are attempting to be selective about and championing, and explain why, and also why it's of interest to you. So, some of the video's not working, I can tell. In Nova Scotia, as is the case in any modern economy, energy is critical to our future. But fortunately, as a result of our geology and our geography, we are well positioned to supply both our own energy needs, to participate in emerging renewable energy markets, and to allow us to enjoy the benefits of profitable energy exports while contributing to North America's energy security. More to say about each of those. Daily, since December of 1999, Nova Scotia's offshore has supplied up to 25% of New England's natural gas from the Sable Offshore Energy Project. And we have about 40 trillion cubic feet of natural gas potential in our offshore. We are an emerging energy market. We have been mining coal in Nova Scotia, however, since the 18th century, and we have onshore coal bed methane deposits yet untapped within 20 miles of the Maritimes Northeast pipeline, which currently supplies New England. And we enjoy a high-velocity wind regime, as you can imagine, given our location as we are jutting out there in the North Atlantic. And we are once again turning our attention to the potential provided by the 100 billion tons of seawater that surge through the Bay of Fundy on a daily basis each day. And I'll have more to say about that. The challenge for us, like many small jurisdictions, is how can we best develop these resources to best advantage in a sustainable and responsible way? We believe at least part of the answer for this lies in our education system. Nova Scotia has more post-secondary institutions per capita than any other region in North America. 11 post-secondary institutions for a population of less than 1 million people. And one of the consequences of this concentration of post-secondary institutions is that Nova Scotia has one of the most highly educated workforces in Canada. And in the energy sector, our knowledge workers outnumber production workers, despite the list of resources that I went through, 3 to 1. Another consequence of this concentration is that we are home to some of the world's leading scientists, working on cutting-edge energy research, such as pioneering the use of electromagnetic imaging as a tool for hydrocarbon prospecting in Nova Scotia's offshore, carbon sequestration research, and fuel cell research. And innovation is offering new ways to use another energy resource, tidal power, the one I mentioned before. Nova Scotia's Bay of Fundy has long been recognized for its extreme tides and its potential. As I said, more than 1 billion tons of water swell and recede twice daily, a weight of about 70 times the daily discharge of the Mississippi River. That's more than the combined flow of all of the world's freshwater rivers in a day. Now, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that our American friends have been thinking for many years about electrical power generation from tidal flow. A hydroelectrical engineer from Boston, Dexter Cooper, came up with the idea in 1916 of harnessing the tide's energy to produce Maine's Passamaquoddy Bay electrical generation. And Franklin Roosevelt became acquainted with the concept and actually secured $6 million in U.S. Treasury funding to study the project before it was abandoned in 1936. Then later, President Eisenhower and eventually President Kennedy would explore the possibilities of Bay of Fundy tidal power. But it wasn't until 1984, with a project that was developed in Nova Scotia by Nova Scotians, that large-scale tidal power generation became a reality in North America. We built a plant that produces about 20 megawatts of energy from Fundy tides by damming the mouth of the Annapolis River at a location where it empties into the Bay of Fundy, taking advantage of the tidal flow up the river. It's one of only 3 commercial tidal power generation plants in the world. It's a small project compared to Cooper's dream of damming the entire Bay of Passamaquoddy Bay, but it has taught us lessons. As a result of this project and other projects we looked at subsequent to constructing this project, we now know that Dexter Cooper's dam probably would have had huge environmental implications and would never have been built today. But fortunately, there is a new technology emerging, a technology with a much smaller physical environmental footprint, in-stream tidal. Unlike barrage dam systems, tidal in-stream energy conversion devices are placed in flowing tidal streams and harness the kinetic energy of the moving water. A 2006 study from the EPRI Institute in Palo Alto, California, identifies the Bay of Fundy as perhaps the most promising site for tidal power generation in North America. The EPRI study estimates 300 megawatts of potential energy from just 8 of the sites that it examined in Nova Scotia. That's 8 of the sites on that Bay of Fundy, which, as you can imagine, is a considerable size just on the Nova Scotia side of the provincial boundary with New Brunswick. The potential from the Bay of Fundy tides in Nova Scotia, just in the Bay of Fundy, not considering other locations outside the Bay, of which there are many as a result of tides, is close to 2,000 megawatts. That's roughly enough electricity to power about 600,000 homes. And our population is about 900,000. While there are other locations and applications for in-stream tidal devices, Nova Scotia has the greatest potential for large-scale centralized generation on the continent, all contained in one area, close to the existing grid and export markets. It's not a very long distance between the Bay of Fundy and landfall on the other side in New Brunswick or Maine, and not that far, in fact, from New York. And why is the potential of Fundy tides of such great interest to Nova Scotia now? Well, as you can tell, it's been kicking around for a while as an idea. But recently, the Nova Scotia government has passed a law requiring our utilities to have 20% renewable electricity generation by 2013. That's only 6 years away. We expect much of this generation to come from wind. I should say at the moment we are extremely fossil fuel dependent. We do expect much of this generation to come from wind, but as earlier speakers have noted, wind does pose problems for grid stability. It's unpredictable, it's intermittent, and not reliable. And while tides are also intermittent, energy generated from tides is completely predictable and regular. And for a province so dependent on fossil fuels, this predictable nature of this clean energy source will allow us to better manage GHG reductions from coal-burning electricity generation. But it will be several years before tidal energy devices will be at a commercial stage. Some devices exist only as concepts, while others are ready to be tested as full-scale demonstration projects. And if you think of that gap that Michael showed early in terms of the technology gap, some of those devices are in that vulnerable area. And we need to allow developers to get into the water and refine their designs as we prepare to meet our 2013 targets. We need a governance structure so that investors have an efficient, predictable, and transparent regulatory process. As I mentioned, the environmental implications of this technology hold the potential of consequences to what is a very precious fishery in my province. And so it's important that we do understand it. So while it's important for government to discharge its public obligation to protect the environment, we also need to understand the potential of this possibility from not only the electrical generation point of view, but from an environmental perspective. It's a complicated question, as any of you are familiar with in a federation. While Nova Scotia owns the seabed where we will locate these devices, and we have responsibility over the environment, the federal government has jurisdiction over fisheries and oceans, navigation, shipping, cross-border trade, and large projects that have potential of environmental impacts. So we've got a lot of government departments involved here. But fortunately, these challenges haven't deterred the innovators. Currently, in Nova Scotia alone, we have 9 expressions of interest for tidal power generation in our Bay of Fundy. So we need to navigate the regulatory waters quickly on 2 fronts. On one front, we are creating a regulatory regime to support offshore renewable energy development. And with the federal government, we are creating a one-window approach for developers so that we can process applications as efficiently as possible. This will allow our investors certainty and allow them to get into the water. It involves issues like rents, the space, the actual land that people will locate their turbines on, as well as the myriad of environmental and fisheries issues. Our effort with the federal government will coordinate, we expect, our intergovernmental regulation and make it easier for investors. And on another front, the province of Nova Scotia is funding a strategic environmental assessment in the Bay of Fundy. This assessment will help us locate an appropriate test site and also allow us to evaluate potential effects on marine life, the fishery, ice activity, noise and vibration, and other factors. The challenges and opportunities are enormous. We don't know which machines will survive in the Bay of Fundy with its extreme currents. And there is a question about whether or not they'll be ready to participate in our 20% renewable energy standard portfolio. But the prize is huge. When any of these devices are proven, their developers will be poised for massive commercial expansion into world markets. And at home, Nova Scotia Power, our privately owned and publicly traded provincial utility, is getting ready to put a full-scale demonstration device in the water, hopefully with some help from some federal agencies as well. And at 1 megawatt, it will be the largest in-stream tidal device in the world. In closing, there are many exciting energy stories taking place around this world at this time when we have the tension between our energy needs and our concern about the environment. Tidal power is just one of them. But it's a dream that we as Canadians and Americans have shared since the early 20th century. And I believe it's one that we're on the brink of finally realizing. I believe that the science and innovation will allow us to tap into the huge potential of the Bay of Fundy Tides and also allow us to unleash the power, that power in a way that is, by all accounts, an environmentally friendly manner. And while there are obstacles yet to be navigated, I think we are about to ride a new, trying not to say tidal wave, but new energy wave. Thank you.
Alison, thank you very much for those comments. To end off our government panel comments on energy innovation, Dan Desmond is the Deputy Secretary, Energy and Technology Office with the Department of Environmental Protection in Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Dan.
Good morning. We're certainly aware that we live in an energy-dependent world and very much aware of the strategic importance of our energy partnership with Canada. Nonetheless, our administration over the past 4 years and for the next 4 has as a principal goal an objective of keeping as many energy dollars inside the Commonwealth as possible. We currently export about $30 billion a year, much of it out of the country, for petroleum products. And recognizing that the oil industry began in Pennsylvania, the coal industry, much of the early natural gas industry, we have historically been an energy state and still export about a third of our electric power to neighboring states. And as a consequence, we have a history of energy sovereignty, and while we are certainly aware that there are some global realities that one cannot dismiss, we still believe that there's untapped potential for alternative and indigenous energy resources, and it's a rather broad spectrum, and I'll go over this in cursory form and be glad to answer any questions in more detail afterwards. Beginning with coal, we are about to build what will be the world's first waste coal to liquid plant in Schuylkill County, Pennsylvania. It's what you call a polygeneration plant. We've had mountains of waste coal in Pennsylvania. I'm happy to say they're getting used up and getting reclaimed, but if you leave them in place, they're an unending source of pollution and environmental damage, and if you burn them inside a closed reactor, you have the opportunity to do a number of things. First of all, this reactor is a polygeneration plant. It will create both electric power and chemicals, principally fuel oil or jet fuel and naphtha. But in addition, it will be set up for carbon offtake, and we've already done some significant mapping in the Commonwealth of where the saline aquifers are, where one could likely sequester carbon dioxide at not too great an expense because they're reasonably shallow. But we are pre-planning for a time when carbon sequestration is going to be a reality in terms of the use of fossil fuels, and we're designing into the plant that capacity. At the same time, we're pursuing renewable energy, perhaps with more focus than has happened historically in our government and I dare say many others. For example, we've done something rather unusual with our department. We're a regulatory bureaucracy. Historically, environmental regulators have been like the carpenter whose only tool was a hammer and everything looked like a nail. But we've put inside the senior management of our agency a green tech economic development team. And that means that between us and our other cabinet level Department of Community and Economic Development, we have a specific system-wide administration top-down focus on attracting green tech firms to the Commonwealth. We've been reasonably successful so far in doing that. For example, the second largest wind turbine company in the world has set up shop in Pennsylvania, and over the last couple of years they've built 4 manufacturing plants and 1,000 industrial jobs have come out of that. Well, one of the interesting things that happens from a political perspective when you do something like this is you can talk to both sides of the aisle in our legislature and move out of the way a lot of the ideological posturing that historically has had those who want to protect the environment on one hand and those who want to preserve the economy on the other hand. When you bring 1,000 manufacturing jobs into a legislator's district, he does not ask for your political party registration. And so as a consequence, we've gotten broad bipartisan support, consequently, for a legislative agenda that has further empowered and supported our efforts to develop our indigenous resources. We're the first coal state to get a renewable portfolio standard and the only RPS in the country to provide trading credits for conservation. So you can not only make money in the trading market if you're doing wind or solar or biomass or clean coal, but you can make money in the trading market if you're not using electric power. We expect those regs to be in place shortly from our Public Utility Commission, and we think it will change the dynamics significantly in terms of how we look at our energy markets. Other pieces of legislation that are pending would require all utilities to provide all customer classes with smart meters. Smart meters can not only give customers price signals, for example, if you want to have an inverted block tariff and get rewarded for using less, but it can allow the aggregation of smaller loads into larger loads. We've developed a technology in our state that has now been sold to GE called GE Wireless, where you could have some small-scale wind and solar and biomass and maybe clean coal operations that collectively could be grouped into multi-megawatt packages and then sold on the New York Mercantile Exchange as commodity merchant power if you could only identify the sources and bundle them together into the size of packages that would be necessary in order to do trading. Furthermore, we have an aggressive biofuel piece of legislation that's coming up that will move about 1 billion gallons over the next few years of biofuels into our market, both biodiesel and ethanol. We will end up with an E10 standard for ethanol. We already have one major refinery, Sunoco, who's had that out in our marketplace for years. But beginning with a B2 up to a 20% biodiesel mix as well. Now, Pennsylvania is not necessarily known as a biodiesel capital. You think of some of the Midwest states, but we probably have more infrastructure going in than any place else in the country. We have 3 major rail yards where 100-car unit trains can come in for high-speed offloading and blending at our distribution terminals. As you may know, you don't ship biofuels through the pipelines. You blend at the distribution terminals, and you have to have the infrastructure to accomplish that. We also have barge capacity coming in on the Delaware River in the east and the Monongahela River in the west. And there are some 42 biofuel plants in various stages of planning. Let's be realistic and say half of them were built. We're going to have an enormous number of ethanol and biodiesel plants and distribution infrastructure in our state in order to meet these clean fuel market objectives. So I think that, and I'll sum up here, but I'm mindful of the time, but we have wanted to illustrate by deploying out in the field real technologies with real markets and real customers, and we have wanted to push the envelope. For example, the governor put a order in place that moves a quarter of our state vehicle fleet to hybrids. Well, I drove here in a small hybrid four-wheel drive that has maybe double the miles per gallon of a standard, and it's a great car. And so we wanted to use the state's purchasing power to behave as a customer to stimulate the market. For example, we're doing offtake. We've got a 29-year contract with this waste coal plant to buy the diesel and fuel oil that will come off of that, or at least a good portion of it. So by having someone there to pull on the string, rather than government policy simply pushing on the string, you've said to Wall Street, we believe that long-term commodity contracts for alternative fuels are not only possible but necessary. Here's our money, here's our contract. And we think that that is one of the things that is most essential in order to get the capital investment in for some of the emerging technologies, is for government to lead the way and use its purchasing power and go long on contracts and provide some economic certainty and some economic stability in markets, because all nascent markets are hypervolatile. We saw that when MTBE was phased out, saw what happened to ethanol recently. It certainly happened in the early oil industry. You have to provide an incubator, if you will, where prices can be relatively stable and people who are investing in these alternative technologies have some assurance that they know where the cash flow is going to go and where the customers are. So to sum up, we've done some unusual things with our regulatory agencies, with our economic development agencies, and with our administration policies that are focusing on making green tech the core of our manufacturing base. And that's not small potatoes. We have a $500 billion gross state product in Pennsylvania. A quarter of that comes from manufacturing jobs. So with us, manufacturing still matters. And we believe that to the extent that we can grow the business community in our state in a green way, we can take some of the ideological barriers out of the way and move aside some of the historic arguments about whether or not you preserve the environment or the economy. As the founder of Earth Day, Senator Gaylord Nelson, said quite presciently many years ago, the economy is a wholly owned subsidiary of the environment. And we're having a pretty good stroke of luck so far with this approach, and we think that there are ways that not only we as government officials, but individual citizens, there are ways in which we can have some energy economies and some energy security that hadn't even been considered only a few years ago. I'll close by saying that the reason I know this is possible is I just finished putting the finishing touches on my house. It's a 50-year-old house in the country. It's got a ground source heat pump, but solar photovoltaics that are grid connected. So I get 3/4 of the heating and cooling energy from the earth, and the other quarter is offset by pumping the grid at various times of year with sunshine. And that's backed up with a biodiesel system that can run from inverters. Now, people say, well, what did this cost? Well, about the price of a new car. But that's possible for a lot of middle-class people in North America. And so there are things that we can do individually. There are things that we can do from a government perspective that are perhaps outside the box, but certainly not impossible. I'll close by saying that I've spent 37 years in this industry, mostly in the private sector, and the longer I live, the less frequently I employ words like never and always. There's all kinds of surprises that are coming around the bend, and including Axion Battery from Canada, which has just developed the world's first hybrid electric battery, which has great promise for innovative ways to store electric power. So thanks to our Canadian friends, and thanks to the Woodrow Wilson Center for hosting this meeting.
And thank you very much for concluding the government side with some very practical messages about implementation, personal and particularly taken by the government purchasing the long-term strategies that you've talked about. Can I ask some musical chairs now, please, if just for the webcast portion of this, if we could move first four to the last four.
First one.
That one's yours. Or if you want to do it yourself, left or right.
Up, go up this way.
Yeah. So we're going to press on with the balance of our panel this morning. First of all, two presentations to provide us with an industry perspective, and then we will wrap up with an academic perspective and an assessment of new technology perspective. So first, in our industry perspective, Anita Perry, Vice President of Government and Public Affairs with BP Canada. Anita.
Thank you for inviting BP to participate today, and thank you to the Woodrow Wilson Foundation, Colleen, David, and we do appreciate the opportunity to participate in this interesting topic. I'd like to add a caveat, first of all, to my presentation today. I am not the technology expert, but I am the proud messenger. I have many BP colleagues here in the U.S., in Canada, and around the globe who work day in, day out, immersed in researching and developing technology to better find and develop hydrocarbons and alternative energy sources. Just a little bit about BP in North America. Since 2001, BP has invested more than $30 billion in North America, including major investments to increase existing energy sources, extend energy supplies, and develop new low-carbon technologies. BP employs more than 35,000 people in the U.S., 1,500 in Canada, and has $40 billion in fixed assets in the U.S. alone. Our strategies support the development of energy for light, heat, and mobility, and we do so under the consideration of the theme of beyond energy, beyond petroleum, sorry. First, I want to talk about the shift from conventional to unconventional and new sources of energy. And this is a slide from CAP, and it's about a year old, but I think it's still valid today. It depicts in Canada that the industry is moving from conventional gas sources for supply to unconventional sources, like coal bed methane and tight gas. Most new supply sources are also in more geographically and socially challenged areas. The unconventional gas is not easily explored nor developed. The challenges are complex from environment, safety, social, and cost perspectives. In addition, recent government policies and public opinion are forcing industry to make changes, and I think of the new BC Energy Plan, which has an ambitious conservation target to acquire 50% of BC's hydro incremental resource needs through conservation by 2010. And I think of California state emissions rules and regulations that have come across over the last 10 years. So the current North America debate on climate change and coming Canadian federal government policies on greenhouse gases will steer industry to develop the best technologies. Just want to talk a bit about how BP does things. So when we're thinking of the key drivers, to think about technology for tomorrow, we choose our focus areas for long-term technology investment by identifying the global trends that we believe will drive the future of the energy industry. You can see in the top right corners where we start around on the wheel. The first driver of the future energy industry is demand growth. According to the International Energy Administration, world energy demand will grow by, depending on which year's report we talk about, more than 50% by 2030 is the latest one that I've seen, while the developing world is accounting for 2/3 of that growth. The second driver that we look at is the location of supply and resources. Although the world has enough oil, gas, and coal to last many, many decades, there are growing challenges in making new resources available. The third driver we look at is security of supply. Concern over supply is likely to grow as many countries rely more on imported energy and supplies become concentrated in fewer areas. And the final driver is the environmental impact of energy, with a steady tightening of standards to address concerns about pollution and climate change from emissions. So then when we get to the point of deciding which energy technologies to focus on, we use a strategic framework which sets out 3 categories of activity. First, we look to technologies that provide the technical capability to identify new hydrocarbon resources and better exploit those we have. We call this category resource business extensions. And secondly, we work on conversion technologies, those that convert hydrocarbon feedstocks into efficient fuels and chemicals. And thirdly, we aim to prioritize low carbon technologies for power and transport to minimize CO2 emissions. thinking about, in this next slide, technologies for tomorrow. So oil and gas is expected to remain at the heart of our business, and the world still has enormous reserves. While concern about future availability, particularly of oil, is not new, resources are in large part a function of cost and technical capability. We're focusing at BP on technologies that will help us access viscous oil, tight gas, and the Arctic regions, to name some. And some of the current technology applications at BP include, in our Liberty field in Alaska, some ultra-extended reach drilling capabilities, which eliminates the need for gravel islands because we drill from onshore, so it's an extended horizontal drill. Some of the great work we're doing in the Rockies, both in Canada and the US, and directional drilling programs. And in our Gulf of Mexico King Field, some subsea pumps, new technology, which will improve recovery rates. And BP Canada is currently testing innovative fracking methods coupled with technology to bring a tight gas pilot to development. Tight gas is gas found in extremely dense formations, so think about your marble granite countertop in your kitchen. That's the rock formation we're into. An investment in innovative technology and methods is risky, and it's not cheap. In this Canadian tight gas project alone, it's not a project yet, it's still a pilot, and we've already spent over $80 million just on technology and innovative methods of going after the gas. So that's before even terming this, giving it sanction as a project, which would be probably near the $1 billion mark. BP is also, some of you have heard about some of these projects. I think somebody mentioned this one this morning. This is our project in Peterhead, Scotland. But we're developing a range of low carbon technologies in order to capture business opportunities and assist the global effort to limit greenhouse gas emissions. So we're focusing on CO2 capture and storage. This photo here is of the world's first industrial scale hydrogen power plant at Peterhead, Scotland, where we plan to create hydrogen and CO2 from natural gas. And the CO2 will then be injected into an oil field to enhance recovery. So in 2006, further to this announcement, in 2006, BP announced plans to build a $1 billion first-of-its-kind hydrogen-fueled power plant in California to deliver enough carbon-free electricity to the LA area grid to serve about 325,000 homes. The process will convert petroleum coke, which is a refinery byproduct, to hydrogen. Carbon dioxide will be captured and stored permanently in mature oil fields, where it will also help to recover otherwise inaccessible oil. And this is at our Carson refinery in California. Also, I heard other people speak this morning about biofuels. BP has announced recently that it will invest $500 million in a new Energy Biosciences Institute. And it's the first facility of its kind in the world, focused on exploring bioscience applications and applying them to the production of new and cleaner energy, principally renewable fuels for road transport. And a year ago, we announced that we were investing $8 billion over the next 10 years in BP Alternative Energy, a new business that will use solar, wind, hydrogen, and natural gas to provide cleaner, low-carbon power. And our solar arm was already working, has been in business for quite a number of years, and it's a profitable business. So, you know, we look at opportunities that are profitable, obviously, but also that that we have an interest in producing low-carbon technologies. This is another slide from CAP, but just to show that industry has made strides. Industry's been working this, and the oil sands, BP is not a player in the oil sands in Canada, but many other companies are, and they are actively researching new technologies to bring their projects to development. These are just 4 examples of such technologies that are in the works right now. And most of these companies want to reduce their dependency on natural gas, which was and still is the fuel most producers there use to mine and power the upgraders and other processes to turn the tar into a viscous state. At our company, one of the exciting new developments that we have is a wireless seismic that we call Firefly. And not only does it reduce the environmental footprint of doing seismic, as those of you who will know the oil and gas industry, there's quite a footprint when you're shooting seismic. It'll reduce the environmental footprint, but it also, will reduce safety exposures. We're going into tougher places, though this photograph doesn't really look like a very tough place to get into. It might be a couple of rattlesnakes in there. But we'll, it also will improve the seismic imaging. And we're working with a third party on this. It's a company called I.O. to develop the cableless technology. Additional benefits of this also include a reduction in project cycle time, which is very important in our world, and overall costs. And we did the first field trial in December, January of this year of this product, so it's still in testing, but it is cutting-edge stuff. And just to give an example of what that looks like is the transmitter box is about this big, and the probe is a little bit bigger than this glass. And it's very exciting, and we're using it already, and it's giving us great results. So we're working on things for today, but we're investing into the future, lots of future prospects. And I spoke a bit about biofuels, and some of you may have seen an announcement recently about some work we've done up in Alaska with the U.S. Department of Energy and U.S. Geological Survey into looking at core samples, drilling to get core samples of gas hydrates. So we're always looking into the future. That project is very early days, but necessary. And also, recently we've seen announcements in Alberta of an industry player in Canada that's funded the new Alberta Ingenuity Centre for Oil Sands Innovation at the University of Alberta, and another company invested at the University of Calgary money to develop the workforce capacity and research innovation critical to industry success. So it's not just getting the technology, but it's getting the people. It's educating the people, because we have to fuel in our academic institutions. We have to develop more scientists, and so it's exciting days, I think, for the energy industry. And finally, I just want to leave us with the notion that collaboration is the key. We're not going to get there alone, and innovative partnerships are needed between governments, industry, academia, and the public. And when I think of innovation in partnership, don't just think of it in technology. Think of it in how we do business, joint ventures with other groups. In Canada, as some of you will know, that a large part of development exploration in Canada is on Aboriginal lands. How can we do innovative partnerships with Aboriginal groups? How can we employ? How can we train? How can we bring them into the business? How can we allow them to build sustainable communities for themselves? That is a very big part of what BP does, and where our focus is when we're looking at new development. Another thing is, what does industry need from government? Industry does need government. We all have to do this together. We need policy development, work with the industry rather than in isolation. Recently, there was the government of British Columbia released its 5-year energy strategy, a great plan. If you go on their website and have a look at that plan, but they consulted industry. The electrical industry, the oil and gas industry, they consulted everybody on that plan. Another thing that we need is fair royalty regimes that support development of innovative technologies. Keep the rules of engagement fair and keep them consistent. Another piece that is very much needed and is on public education about the industry, about energy, about oil and gas, about electricity. More and more and more public education is required. Colleen's group does great work at the Centre for Innovation in Canada, but everybody has a role to play on education, absolutely everybody. And if we need to find the students to enter our industry, as there's a great labor shortage, I know in Canada there is in our industry, we have to educate them about the industry, we have to excite them about the industry. And finally, partnerships on infrastructure with government. That's roads. In some cases, maybe we have to work on basic infrastructure to build small villages. I know in one of our developments in the U.S., that's basically what we've done, is work to develop a small village to support the major development. So I leave you with those thoughts. It's great, exciting times for our company. It's exciting times for industry, and we're looking to be a player for many, many years. Thank you.
Thank you, Anita, and again, thanks to BP for being one of the key sponsors here today. Our next speaker is Stan Rosinski. Stan is Program Manager for Technology Innovation at EPRI, the Electric Power Research Institute. So,
okay.
Well, good morning, everybody, and thank you to the Woodrow Wilson Center for the invitation to present today. It is an honor to be here on behalf of the Electric Power Research Institute. For those of you that may not be familiar with EPRI, we are a nonprofit member organization founded in 1973 to perform collaborative research and development for our member utilities. EPRI membership encompasses domestic, and in the context of this meeting, that includes U.S. and Canada, and international, many international utilities as well. Oh dear, we don't have any pictures. I got some really nice graphics here too. Well, all right, we have it on that one. I'll go back a slide, and we'll just go with that for that particular one. There, I got it. Okay, thank you. The electricity enterprise is at a crossroads. It faces technical challenges in each major part of the value chain, from power production to energy delivery and end use. However, each challenge presents an opportunity as well. Meeting these challenges will necessitate the upgrade of our aging electricity infrastructure, which will improve the reliability and quality of power delivered to end users. This, in turn, will improve economic productivity via reduced outage costs, fewer disruptions to sensitive equipment, and other economic benefits. Innovation, specifically technology innovation, is needed to accelerate this development, produce new technologies, and ultimately assure viability and sustained growth of the electric power sector. In the next few slides, I will briefly discuss just a few of these technology challenges. It is not intended to be all-inclusive, but I will touch upon a few areas. Innovation in technology can help us make better use of what we have. The electric power industry is by far the most asset-intensive industry in the world. The value of U.S. transmission and distribution assets alone has been estimated in excess of $350 billion. Upgrading this tremendous asset base to extend its life and enhance its capabilities is one of the most pressing needs that our industry faces. One way to improve power delivery asset utilization is to increase transfer capacity using existing rights-of-way. On transmission systems, technology improvements that promise this capability include increasing the voltage, reconfiguring conductors into a more compact arrangement, using high ampacity conductors, and installing high-temperature superconducting cables. And one advent that I have not touched on is nanotechnology. That, I think, is a very exciting area which can have application to many of these challenges. In the United States, 1/2 of all electricity is generated from coal. While coal generation is foreseen to remain a significant portion of the U.S. electricity generation mix, and specifically across the planet, significant barriers to broader use of coal do exist, and technology innovation is a key component in removing these barriers. One barrier, of course, is cost. Electricity from initial integrated gasification combined cycle, or IGCC plants, without CO2 capture and storage will cost at least 15 to 20% more than electricity from conventional coal power plants with sulfur dioxide and NOx emission controls. To reduce these costs and accelerate commercial use of advanced coal technologies, EPRI has initiated a collaborative program called the Coal Fleet for Tomorrow that now includes over 60 participants representing a significant majority of U.S. coal-fired generation. Innovative coal plant configurations, including IGCC, ultra-supercritical pulverized coal, and supercritical circulating fluidized bed combustion promise to boost the availability or lower the heat rate and emissions in the near term, and ultimately lead to the commercial introduction of next-generation plant designs that are approximately 20 to 25% lower in capital costs. Yeah, try it, yeah. Thank you. Improvements in electric energy storage, of course, are very important and will continue to be an important element in assuring a robust and stable electric grid and in the successful implementation of widespread renewable energy resources. We already heard this morning some of the difficulties associated with wind energy regarding capacity factor. Well, energy storage is a critical element of maintaining that viability. Such improvements may also be the primary enabling technology for plug-in hybrid electric vehicles, as we've already heard this morning. The viability of advanced coal technology development will absolutely depend on the successful demonstration and implementation of carbon capture and storage technologies. To significantly reduce CO2 emissions over the coming decades, commercial-scale coal-based generation units will ultimately need to operate with 90+% CO2 capture and storage in a variety of geologies. In addition to the technology challenges associated with carbon capture and storage, significant environmental issues will need to be addressed. An important motivation for upgrading the aging power delivery infrastructure is to improve power system reliability. Although the most visible recent motivation to improve system reliability may have been the August 2003 blackout that affected U.S. and Canada, the hard fact is that the number of people affected by outages is rising. Arresting this rise and mitigating wide area blackouts will require technological advances in more than just a few areas. Congestion on transmission lines can be mitigated by optimizing system operating methods, increasing system capacity, managing the aging system assets systematically, and planning for the long term. At the same time, efforts to increase the reliability of individual components can complement methods of increasing wide area reliability via system control and protection. Advanced power controllers will become part of a future adaptive, self-healing grid that includes automated capabilities to optimize the performance of the system, respond to disturbances instantly to minimize the impact, and restore the system after a disturbance. The basic building blocks will also include advanced sensors, enhanced computational ability, and pattern recognition software. Try it again. Thanks. A consumer portal is a combination of hardware and software that enables two-way communication between energy service organizations and the consumer's facilities, including equipment within the consumer's premises. A portal can facilitate consumer participation in demand response programs, enable automatic meter reading, and broaden consumer interaction with the energy supplier in areas such as billing, reviewing energy consumption, reporting trouble, and selecting a service provider. More motivated consumers could optimize their energy use by downloading price forecasts, computing energy efficiency of appliances, controlling distributed energy resources at multiple sites, and submitting bids to an energy market. On the other side of the meter, a portal helps distribution companies monitor equipment, detect and isolate outages, shed load with finer control, better optimize power quality, monitor distributed energy resources, and better control voltage. Hence, a portal can reduce energy costs for consumers and reduce various costs for distribution companies, while improving power quality for consumers and offering new revenue opportunities for service providers. It promises one of the biggest win-win propositions in the long history of electricity. Seems to be intermittent power supply. Right. In the interest of time, I did not specifically discuss nuclear. However, it is certainly clear that advanced technologies are needed not only just to sustain the current global nuclear fleet, which is not a given, but also to develop advanced nuclear technologies such as Gen 4, other fission technologies, and also fusion technologies, and also to close the nuclear fuel cycle, which involves reprocessing. What I've shown here in my conclusion slide are just a few additional resources that are available to you regarding key technology challenges that EPRI has looked at and that we are pursuing through the Technology Innovation Program at EPRI. Additional information can also be found on our website at epri.com. Again, thank you for the opportunity. Hopefully it works.
Thanks, Dan. Next up we have Dennis Ray, who's going to present us with an academic perspective. Dennis is the Executive Director, Power Systems Engineering Research Center, the University of Wisconsin-Madison.
That's not right.
Right one.
Okay. Thanks. Always want to check the technology out before you get into it. I want to give thanks to David Beatty and to Colleen Killingsworth for the invitation to be here today. And I would like to indicate that my comments are my own, not those of PSERC's university or industry members. PSERC is a 13-university consortium that exists here in the U.S. We have members industry members both in the U.S. and in Canada. We focus on power systems research, both from mainly in the area of systems, that is between that area between generation and end use. At this forum, we're looking at energy technology transformation and innovation. And when it comes to energy, I must confess that I'm a bit of a niche player. My focus will principally be on PSERC's research focus, power systems. And that focus not only includes the physical network, but it also includes how it's operated for reliability, efficiency, and a market-based economy. Okay.
I can do this from here if it's easier.
Go for it. Okay. I'd like to offer 4 points that I hope are uncharacteristically practical from an academic perspective. 1, innovation is happening with some pretty cool stuff appearing. 2, innovation must be continual to address the emerging challenges facing us. 3, people, particularly engineers, are going to be needed to work on innovations and make innovations work. But there are a lot of engineers nearing retirement, faculty too. Finally, policy interactions with innovation need to be understood. Policies advance or retard innovation, sometimes in unintended ways. Unfortunately, the law of unintended consequences may occur more often than we think. Next slide. First, I'd like to show you some of the pretty cool stuff. You may recall that a lack of system awareness is one of the causes of the Canada-U.S. blackout of 2003. Since then, projects deploying new sensors around the eastern and western interconnections are showing that we can learn a lot about system conditions from time-synchronized real-time data that includes a little more information than gathered in the past. The lack of time-synchronized data was one of the major reasons why it took us so long to figure out why the blackout of 2003 occurred. With sensor advances, we are creating data without emission. So one area of current research is finding ways in which these data can be put to use. One way is to produce frequency contours of system conditions. I was taught that frequency is the same throughout an interconnection, somewhere close to 60 hertz. But the color contour display that you cannot see at the moment.
PCS. I can see it.
It's great. It looks good, doesn't it? I'm simulating a blackout here, as it turns out. What you would be seeing, and I'll show it to you later, is that with real-time data, you can actually see frequency waves. You can see if you have an outage, you can actually watch the frequency changing throughout the entire interconnection. Not a whole lot, but it really does occur. And it's through this new data that we're getting new insights into how power systems operate and how we can provide better information to system operators to help them with their critical decision making. A major direction of technology innovation is putting intelligence into the grid, or making the grid smart. Now, I've always had a little trouble with the notion of ascribing intelligence to physical devices. In the early days of laser printers, I had an office printer that, after sitting the printing job to it, would blink thinking until the printer started. I always wondered what it was thinking about. But after all, it was in the office at a university, so I just accepted it. This slide illustrates work that is going on to determine ways of detecting the need for vegetation management by looking for certain distinctive signatures in electric current patterns due to tree contact. Such knowledge could help make vegetation management more efficient as well as more effective in reducing outages. Next slide, please. Research is also going on to revisit the ways that power systems have been operated to see if improvements can be made. One research area is how to effectively and efficiently restore a power system after major outage events, such as the blackout of 2003 and Hurricane Katrina. Predictions of increased weather volatility due to the effects of climate change provides further justification for this research. Recently, I attended the 2007 Electricity Delivery Forum, at which the prevailing notion was that near to medium-term portfolio of resources for meeting our future electricity needs will be natural gas, nuclear power, clean coal technologies with carbon capture and sequestration, renewable technologies, energy efficiency, and demand-side resources or demand response programs. Some say that these 6 choices are really not separable. That is, we need all of them in order to be able to meet our future needs. Use of these technologies will require a robust and resilient grid operated in new ways. An example is the plug-in hybrid vehicle that offers reduced carbon emissions in transportation use. Today, hybrids are charged by the onboard gasoline engine. But the vehicles, once plugged in, will not only be charged from the grid, but will offer the possibility of energy storage. But how are we to operate that energy storage system is something that needs to be explored. This picture, by the way, does not suggest that the future plug-in hybrid will be an SUV. This is actually a charge-carrying SUV developed by students at Georgia Tech University as part of the Future Truck Challenge. Moving generation sources closer to customers and using customer loads to help maintain system reliability via demand response programs requires a new look at how we control and protect local resources. Microgrid research is doing just that. Microgrids are small systems within the larger grid. They could enable customers and distribution utilities to have greater control over their use of local generation and load resources. Microgrids are one possible enabling technology for increased use of renewable resources and demand response programs. To develop innovations such as microgrids and to make them work, we need engineers. A major concern facing the industry, both in the U.S. and Canada, is the looming retirement eligibility of a great number of engineers, perhaps 30% in the next 5 years or so. Importantly, there are also a great number of power engineering faculty who are going to be eligible for retirement. Sustaining our university power engineering programs has been identified as a critical issue by the U.S. Department of Energy, the Canadian Electricity Association, and the North American Electric Reliability Corporation, and the Power Engineering Society of the IEEE, among others. We need to be hiring new faculty, but the evidence suggests that we aren't. Over the last decade, the younger, untenured faculty have fallen to 12% from 20% of total power engineering faculty. It may be counterintuitive to you that to educate the next generation of power engineers, there needs to be more research funding opportunities made available to universities, but that is the case. To get approval to hire new faculty, engineering college deans want to see that there are substantial research opportunities in the power area. Depending on the university, a faculty member needs to have about a $200,000 to $300,000 research program to support graduate students and other research costs per year. But our power faculty report that research funds have fallen some 18% over the last 3 years. This survey was done both in the U.S. and Canada. But the reason why is principally due to decreased government funding. Industry giving was actually up over the period, and that's terrific. But the electric power industry is still probably devoting only about 0.2% of revenues to research. Someone paying 10 cents per kilowatt hour for electricity would only be paying 0.02 cents per kilowatt hour for research costs. Doubling the amount of research funding would not increase retail rates much, but would regulatory policies allow it? I'm going to now talk about a regulatory model that's principally the U.S., and I'm going to hope that you, as Canadians, can make the link to Canada. Slide 9. Besides considering what should be done to educate the next generation of power engineers, we need to be looking at the effects of policies on innovation. I get the impression that regulators consider themselves as bystanders when it comes to technology innovation, but I don't think they really are, because regulatory practices affect R&D spending and directions for innovation. In some cases, I think there are clashes of good intentions. Under regulation in the public interest, customer prices are based on costs that are deemed just and reasonable, a good intention. In addition, I think regulators, if asked, would say that R&D is a good thing, again, a good intention. But when the regulatory auditors start looking at R&D costs, they can question whether the costs meet the legal standards for inclusion in rates. Here, R&D costs may not be allowed in rates because there's no policy clarity on when R&D costs are just and deemed just and reasonable. Relatedly, there may not be a policy on whether to give flexibility to regulated utilities to take on limited technology risks for the sake of obtaining new knowledge. There's also renewed interest in integrated resource planning at the state and regional levels, in part because future energy needs must be met by the portfolio of resource options. Integrated resource planning provides a vehicle for discussions among public, government, and industry, and as well as academia, on what that future portfolio should look like. An emerging question, I believe, for these planning processes, a question that has not really been incorporated, in my opinion, in the past, is what effect alternative technology visions will have on that plan. I was very impressed with the presentation on Pennsylvania's technology vision, and I think that vision is the sort of thing that should be going on in all the states. Retail rate freezes, typically R&D spending a killer. Other areas of concern revolve around policy uncertainties. Will we have a cap-and-trade program for carbon emissions? What will it look like? Where will we stay? Where will we store nuclear waste? Will energy efficiency be included in a utility's obligation to serve? How will cost of transmission be allocated among the different users? There's a lot of policy uncertainties that are affecting innovation. In general, if innovation is needed in the public interest, we need to consider how our policies affect R&D spending. In addition, there are a range of regulatory approaches toward R&D across the various regulatory jurisdictions. I think now is a good time for an assessment of those approaches to see which ones could be most effective in helping us create the technology innovations needed for a sustainable future. Number 10, last one. So we need more collaboration, which has already been stated. Regulators to step back and ask how their policies are affecting R&D, and there should be more discussions about technology vision and about how research can be enabled to solve the challenges facing the electricity sector.
Thank you. And last to sum up the area of assessing new technologies, Steve Fine, Vice President of Energy and Resource Practice at ICF International.
Great. If we could just load the slides, that would be helpful. Well, thank you. It's an honor to be here. I want to thank the Woodrow Wilson Center and the Canada Institute for inviting us. ICF International, we're an energy and environmental consulting firm. We're headquartered in Fairfax, Virginia, which is just in the Metro D.C. area. We have offices nationwide as well as a large office in Toronto, Canada. Do a fair amount of work with NRCan and some of the Canadian utilities, as well as with the U.S. EPA here, and I would say virtually every large utility in this country, evaluating the impact of regulations coming down the pike on their existing generation assets, as well as helping them evaluate what to build next and what's coming down the pipeline. In that context, we also support independent power producers, as well as the financiers that are being asked to finance the next tranche of capacity installation. So in that context, I wanted to come and speak to you about not so much new technology per se, but really assessing the value of generation assets under CO2 regulations and how that starts to shift things in the mind of what's going to be built next, because there are really some significant challenges that the utility industry, that the power industry as a whole is facing in terms of what kind of capacity should be put in the ground next, and that's what I'm going to be addressing here. So next slide, thank you. In the U.S., we're going to need somewhere between 350 to 500 gigawatts of new capacity over the next 25 years. That's a huge amount of capacity. We've got 1,000 gigawatts roughly in the ground right now, so we're talking about a 35 to a 50% increase. And that variation in that number really depends on whose load forecast you believe. EIA is at the lower end of that curve. If you look at historical NERC numbers, what growth has actually been, and if it continues at historical rates, will be closer to sort of a 2% per year growth, and that gets you to the 500 to the upper bound range. In Canada, if you look at NRCan's publications, over the next 20 years, it's probably about 30 gigawatts, although some say that that may be a little bit on the low side, and that would, it would be higher if we were looking at a 25-year time frame. It's interesting to note that in Canada, they're projecting just a 1.2% load growth, and that's also what history has borne out. So the difference between a 1.2 and a 2% load growth between Canada and the U.S. is really just an interesting discrepancy. And one, I don't know enough about the Canadian industry, but to try to explain why Canada has such almost half the load growth that the U.S. is projected to have, or also historically, I think would be an interesting thing to look at. In terms of general principles, new capacity additions on the whole are going to be met by the lowest cost, most profitable resources that are determined by the market, and if state regulators are doing their job and are mimicking market conditions that are allowed by state regulators. That being said, there are policies that promote the impact of the relative profitability of those resources or force things in one way or another. And some typical examples of that are renewable policies, RPS policies in particular. There are 23 states plus the District of Columbia currently in the U.S. that have RPS policies, and those are making huge differences in the amount of renewables that are being built. There are about 11 gigawatts now just in this country of wind that have been built primarily in response, although not completely in response, to those RPS policies. A number of Canadian provinces have those types of policies in place. In Europe, they tend to use more of a feed-in tariff, more of a subsidy type of mechanism, which used to be in place in the U.S., sort of under the form of PERPA regulations. RPS is another way of going about it. Tax credits and subsidies, certainly Energy Policy Act of 2005 created subsidies and credits for new nuclear, for IGCC, all looking to promote resources that otherwise wouldn't be economic, that require R&D, that require some extra push than what the market is going to give it. And then, of course, there's the issue of CO2 policy and how that fundamentally changes market prices and market dynamics, and that's really what I want to focus on here. So anytime a utility, a developer, a bank, anybody is assessing new technology, there are a number of sort of standard risks that they're going to look at. They're going to be looking at fuel risk, and in particular if it's gas price volatility and availability. They're going to be looking at technology risk, and particularly how technologies are ready and if they are ready to be rolled out. That's a huge question right now regarding IGCC. It's a huge question regarding IGCC and carbon capture on the back end, and hence the DOE and a number of other agencies are putting significant R&D dollars into that to make that technology ready. Not quite ready for prime time yet, but a lot of people are banking on that. Nuclear and renewables also, there's a lot of talk about building the next tranche of nuclear in this country as well as others, and where that's going to come out, the price points that's going to come out, not all the political and other issues notwithstanding, but just from a technology perspective, when will that be ready to be deployed? What are the costs going to be that are involved? And then across the swath of new renewables, improvements in sort of existing renewable technologies, wind and landfill gas and other types of biomass, but there's a whole tranche of renewables that have been spoken about earlier today, waiting in the wings, and how is that going to come? How are they going to come in? There's regulatory risk, certainly, regarding what type of market you're operating in. If it's regulated versus competitive market, the types of cost recovery you might be expecting if you're in a regulated market, the type of compensation, the mechanisms for compensation if you're working in a competitive market. So lots of regulatory risk to be taken into account. And then, of course, the new bogey is CO2 risk. And this is really fundamentally changing how people are assessing these other risks. And it's really sort of a horse race now between where you assign the risks and what bet you're making regarding these risks relative to the type of new capacity that you're going to be building. It's certainly a struggle that's occurring daily in the mind of utility executives. We're working with a number of utility companies, and the debate that they're having of needing to serve load now or in the near future, and whether they should build a pulverized coal plant, whether they should wait and build an IGCC or take a bet on an IGCC with the available subsidies that they can get, whether they should be building a gas plant, and looking forward and what the implications of CO2 are on that, Those are all very big questions. The poster child for that, of course, is what's going on with TXU, with the buyout that just happened, or the proposed buyout that was announced about a week and a half ago, and the cancellation of 8 coal plants. That's all an issue of how CO2 is going to be priced into the market and what does it do to the relative economics of those plants. There are other issues associated with that. I'd be happy to talk to people more at break. Next slide, please. So CO2 certainly has huge impacts. It's got large impacts on existing units in terms of how they dispatch, the relative profitability of those units, and that also impacts their control investments, how much money you're going to be ready to invest in existing units. But it's got even bigger, I would argue, implications for what do you build next. And that's where the problem is because there are so many uncertainties regarding what a potential CO2 policy is going to look like, mostly around what the price of a ton of CO2 is going to be, but also around things like allocation, the role of offsets, and a number of other issues that come into play. And that it's really the question of that owners, developers, financiers, regulators, and shareholders are needing to somehow get their hands around this uncertainty and make plans now and dealing with this tremendous uncertainty. This chart, I think, is very useful in just looking at what the cost of CO2 does, or what different price points of CO2 does to the relative competitiveness of different types of generating plants. And what you have is the levelized cost of a plant on a $1 per megawatt hour basis, which is usually a pretty standard way of looking at the relative position or cost of a plant, an all-in cost. And you can see that on the left-hand axis, the first technology, the lowest cost technology, is pulverized coal. There's no question about it. And if you were dealing in a world where CO2 was just not in the cards and that you were looking to build the lowest cost baseload generating plant, you would build a pulverized coal unit. It beats every other technology hands down. And then you have to make you start making other assumptions. What's the price of gas? What's the price? And then what's the price of CO2? What you basically see is that the bar that starts the lower bar, the IGCC, and the pulverized coal unit start out as a lowest first cost without regards to CO2 price. But as the price of CO2 starts to increase along the x-axis, all kinds of interesting things start to happen at $15 a ton CO2. All of a sudden, coal starts to be not the least cost option. Things like nuclear start to come into play, and there are a lot of assumptions here regarding the cost and performance numbers, and one can argue with the absolute values here, but in terms of directionality and what this does to the relative economics of plants, I think this is a very useful chart. Nuclear obviously is a flat line. That's the red line there, just under $70 a megawatt hour. And it's flat because obviously it's emissions free. It's not impacted by the cost of CO2. So its levelized cost is flat no matter what the cost of CO2 is. The coal has the steepest trajectory because it is most influenced by the cost of CO2. And so at $15 a ton, all of a sudden coal becomes less economic than nuclear. Things like nuclear and gas technologies start to become, and this is gas at $6.50 a million BTU. It depends on what your gas price assumption is. And that's one of the things that they're trying to weigh is CO2 risk versus fuel risk, and at what point do different technologies become cost effective. The other interesting point here, and I would just mention, is that carbon capture, IGCC with carbon capture sequestration starts to become economic at about $25, $28 a ton CO2. And so what you end up having is sort of it's been used earlier in sort of the valley of death kind of. It was used in a different context in terms of technology development. Here I'm going to use it in terms of coal development, and that is you develop coal plants over a gas plant, just looking at the relative economics of it, up to about roughly $15 a ton CO2. Between $15 a ton CO2 where coal gets edged out, up to the point again where carbon capture sequestration becomes economic at a little over $25 a ton, say about $28 a ton. That's been referred to as the coal valley of death, and so you have this sort of a strange phenomena that if you're a coal generator and you're thinking about building an IGCC, you either want carbon prices below $15 a ton or you want them above $25 a ton. So there's sort of an interesting dynamic that goes on in terms of the relative economics. Next, please. And I just wanted to put this slide up. This is an analysis we did for one of our clients several years ago where we looked at the portfolio of different of different utility companies, its company as well as several other of its neighboring competitors, and looked at the valuation of the assets under a 3-piece scenario, which is the left-hand set of bars, and a 4-piece scenario, meaning a scenario where you have NOx, SO2, and carbon in the right-hand scenario. And the interesting thing, and there's a lot of information here, but the basic idea is that coal assets take a hit every time under CO2. Non-emitting generation, not surprisingly, nuclear, hydro, renewables, all increase in value under CO2. Gas plants, depending on the market you're operating in, come out relatively flat, assuming that gas is on the margin. And then one of the other big takeaways here, and that's the bar on the right-hand set of bar graphs, is that allocation value becomes key, and how a policy is designed and the value of how CO2 is going to have a value in the marketplace under a cap-and-trade system, if indeed there is a cap-and-trade system. How those allocations are determined by the policies and how the policies are designed means that a company could end up with a CO2 allocation value that rivals the value of its physical assets. So we're talking about an allocation value having potentially tens of billions of dollars per company worth of value. There are a lot of coal companies that have sort of woken up to this fact and are now sort of gotten beyond the point, whether they believe the science or not, that CO2 policy is coming and that they better get a seat at the table because allocation matters an awful lot to the bottom line of a company. And this is how banks are looking at it. This is how, rating agencies are looking at it in terms of what does CO2 do to the valuation of plants going forward, both existing plants as well as new plants, and how that is going to determine an awful lot of what technology they actually get behind and fund. So in keeping it short and in being mindful of the fact that you're waiting for your donuts, the future ain't what it used to be in terms of capacity planning. CO2 is coming. The industry has sort of taken it on, not because they're enamored with it, but because they need certainty. They are facing huge amounts of investment in new capacity and worth hundreds of billions of dollars, and they need some framework because there's too much risk if planning just for a 3P world and building just a coal asset without any potential for CO2 and then getting hit with CO2 in the out years is just not a viable plan for them. They need to make more prudent investments, and that's across the board, whether you're a utility, an IPP, a regulator, or an investor. They need to concentrate on the big price and value drivers. When we talk to our clients, there are some very key elements in how an allocation or how a policy as a whole is developed, and they're starting to more actively engage in those things. Regulatory structure matters a whole lot until how generators, it goes a long way in determining how generators are compensated and incented to build new generation. And I will leave it with that. So there's just a huge amount of uncertainty out there. There are multiple, when companies are doing this, they're grappling with this huge amount of uncertainty and trying to get their hands around it. There's no silver bullet answer to any of this. And what we're telling them to do is to develop multiple scenarios and really understand the upsides and downsides, because it works both ways. We're working with, just as a final example, a wind developer that's assessing opportunities in multiple markets around the country, and carbon's an upside for them. So it cuts both ways. It depends on what types of technology you're developing, and the banks and the rating agencies and everybody else are fully aware of this and really starting to incorporate it in their valuations.
Thank you, Steve. Well, that's a pretty mixed and comprehensive set of reviews to hopefully stimulate some thinking about technology innovation. If I can give you just a 1-minute summary, what I go away from this for the break is thinking that we've got some pretty positive developments and advances on the technological innovation side. Somebody mentioned PCS, pretty cool stuff, and there's some pretty cool stuff going on, and I think we've made a lot of progress, and I think there's good agreement nationally and internationally, some good international cooperation going on that front too. But there are some warning signs on the horizon. I think many speakers have spoken to the fact that it isn't just technology by itself. I think we all know this isn't enough. And Somebody raised concerns about high-quality people, whether we've got enough people in some of these. I know this has been raised in the nuclear area. Virtually all the nuclear scientists have either retired or gone on to other jobs in the hiatus over the last 15 or 20 years. So the whole question of people is a major issue. But above all, I would come back to ask you to look at the question of technology innovation as it interplays with the regulatory environment and policy as well, because it's clear that technology innovation is not going to become technology implementation unless we have the right regulatory regimes, the right policies in place, and above all, the right long-term stable investment climates where people can put their money in a place where they think they're going to need and be able to make money. And again, without picking any winners this morning, I want to congratulate the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. They didn't pay me for this commercial, by the way, but to say that, you know, and look, BC is doing some great things in Canada too. Alberta has every region is different in terms of its energy mix and must have its own energy plan that deals with its own regional differences. But I think the concept of providing some stability and long-term signals is something that governments must do. Anyway, enough from me. A 5 absolute maximum 10-minute break, because this is your part of the time we're now eating into. So I'd like to see you back, please, in 10 minutes absolute maximum. And the rest of the morning is yours. It's closed door.